Welcome to the Midnight Lore channel, a quiet place for long-form storytelling, relaxed education, and late-night narration meant to be listened to like a gentle lecture or a calm bedtime story. Whether you are here to learn, to unwind, or to drift into sleep, you are welcome. Settle in, breathe, let the world slow down. Tonight, we explore one of history's largest and least understood conflicts, the Taiping Rebellion, a civil war so vast and so devastating that it reshaped China, weakened an ancient dynasty, and cost tens of millions of lives, yet remains unfamiliar to much of the world. Before we begin, a brief disclaimer. This narration is historical, not political. Every effort has been taken to avoid bias, judgment, or modern cultural interpretation. The events described took place more than 150 years ago, in a very different world. This story is presented for education and understanding only. If you are listening to relax, allow the sound of the narration to guide you gently. If you are here to learn, settle in for a detailed journey through one of humanity's most dramatic upheavals. In the middle decades of the 19th century, China stood as one of the oldest and most populous civilizations on Earth. Yet beneath its long imperial traditions lay deep strains that few in authority had fully recognized. The Qing dynasty, founded by Manchu conquerors in the 17th century, had long maintained stability through a finely balanced combination of Confucian bureaucracy, military organization, and largely harmonious relations among its many ethnic groups. But by the 1800s, those foundations were weakening, slowly but unmistakably. China's population had increased dramatically over the previous century, rising to numbers that stretched the land's capacity. Families divided their farmland with each generation, leading to shrinking plots and rising competition. Areas that once supported rural life comfortably now struggled to feed their inhabitants. Even in good years, many regions lived close to subsistence. In bad years, famine loomed. Natural disasters, flooding from the Yellow River, droughts in the north, and periodic outbreaks of disease amplified this fragile reality. The Qing administration, once admired for its efficiency, was no longer able to keep up. Corruption seeped into offices at nearly every level. Some officials purchased their positions outright, entering office with the intent to extract wealth rather than serve the public. Others, underpaid and under pressure, turned to informal fees or local favoritism to sustain themselves. Ordinary people felt the effects in subtle ways: taxes collected inconsistently, disputes resolved unfairly, and local grievances ignored or mishandled. There was another, more subtle issue. Communication and coordination across the empire were slower and less reliable than ever. China was enormous, stretching from deserts to snow-covered mountains, from fertile river basins to subtropical coastlines. As the population grew and local problems multiplied, the central government increasingly struggled to respond uniformly. Regional tension simmered beneath the surface. On top of all this came a profound external shock, the First Opium War. When the Qing attempted to restrict the opium trade, a drug causing widespread addiction and social harm, Britain intervened militarily. The Qing armies proved unable to match European firepower and modern naval technology. The war ended with the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842, which ceded Hong Kong, opened treaty ports, and forced China into unequal trade relationships. For the common people, this loss was more than political; it was symbolic. Many looked at the state and saw a dynasty unable to defend the country, unable to protect its people, and unable to control the changes sweeping across their land. Foreign merchants, new goods, and missionary influences began reshaping coastal urban life, while the interior remained steeped in poverty and tradition. The contrast only deepened the sense that the old order was faltering. Amid this atmosphere of uncertainty and hardship, a young man named Hong Xiuquan pursued his dreams. Hong was born in Guangdong Province in 1814 into a Hakka family. The Hakka were Han Chinese, but their long history of migration meant they often lived in marginal lands and maintained distinct cultural traditions. In many regions, tensions existed between Hakka communities and non-Hakka locals, creating an environment where social mobility was difficult and resentment was common. Despite these realities, Hong's family believed he could rise through education. From childhood, he studied the Confucian classics, the foundation of the imperial examination system. These exams, theoretically open to all men regardless of background, were seen as the primary path to prestige and government service. They were also notoriously difficult. Only a small fraction of candidates ever passed. Hong was intelligent, but intelligence alone was not enough. The exams required memorization of ancient texts, elegant writing, deep understanding of Confucian philosophy, and the ability to apply classical reasoning to societal questions. They also required money, to travel, to purchase study materials, and to sustain oneself during months of preparation. Hong sat for the provincial-level exam several times. Each attempt represented years of study, months of anticipation, and enormous emotional investment. And each time, Hong failed. The disappointment was crushing. For someone raised with the belief that the examination system was the gateway to success and legitimacy, repeated failure could feel like a personal doom, a sign that fate, or heaven, had closed its doors. After his final failure, Hong collapsed into illness. Fever and mental exhaustion overwhelmed him. He experienced vivid visions: mountains of gold, great celestial palaces, radiant figures, and battles against demonic beings. In these visions, a dignified elder man appeared repeatedly, commanding Hong to rid the world of demons. Hong saw himself wielding a great sword, leading a righteous army. When his fever subsided, the visions lingered in his memory, strange and unclear. For years he pondered their meaning, but it was not until he encountered a set of Christian missionary tracts that the visions clicked into place. The pamphlets described God, Jesus, angels, and the struggle between righteousness and sin. Hong compared the words in these tracts with the faces in his visions and reached a conclusion that would change the course of history. He believed that the elder man he had seen was God, and that he himself was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. This was not mainstream Christianity. It was Hong's deeply personal interpretation, a fusion of his visions, his understanding of the world, and the fragments of Christian doctrine available to him. Interpreting his visions as divine instruction, Hong began preaching. His message attracted listeners who were already dissatisfied with their circumstances. He taught that the Qing dynasty was corrupt and spiritually illegitimate. He denounced Confucian rituals as misguided and declared that God had chosen him to cleanse China of demons, which, in his view, included the ruling Manchu elite. His followers formed the God Worshippers Society, a group that combined spiritual devotion with emerging social and political ideas. They lived simply, rejected traditional hierarchical relationships, and practiced forms of communal resource sharing. The movement emphasized moral discipline, abstinence from alcohol and opium, and strict separation of men and women except within families. At first, local officials saw them as odd but harmless, but the movement grew rapidly, especially among Hakka villagers, impoverished farmers, and those who felt mistreated by the existing order. Tensions with local militias escalated. Clashes broke out. Qing attempts to suppress the group only strengthened their resolve. The God Worshippers Society began arming itself for defense. As more people joined, the movement shifted from self-protection to active rebellion. In 1851, Hong declared the birth of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, proclaiming himself the Heavenly King. With this declaration, the movement moved from religious revival to full political revolution. Taiping armies grew in number and strength. They were organized into disciplined units, often far more motivated than their Qing counterparts. Many soldiers believed sincerely in the movement's spiritual mission, giving them a powerful sense of purpose. Others joined because the Taiping offered food, protection, and a chance for upward mobility at a time when society seemed to offer few such opportunities. The Qing military struggled to respond effectively. Many soldiers were poorly trained, inadequately supplied, or commanded by officers more concerned with personal gain than military strategy. Corruption was widespread. Desertion was common. Against this backdrop, the Taiping surged forward. Villages fell under Taiping control one by one. Local elites fled or submitted. Entire counties and prefectures shifted allegiance. Word spread quickly. A new power was rising, one that promised justice and equality and spoke of a heavenly kingdom on earth. By 1853, Taiping forces began their advance toward Nanjing, one of the empire's most historic and symbolically significant cities. Situated on the Yangtze River, Nanjing had been the capital of earlier dynasties and remained a major cultural and economic center. Its capture would send shockwaves through China. The march toward the city unfolded with momentum. Qing resistance was fragmented and often poorly coordinated. Some commanders underestimated the Taiping's strength. Others hesitated, unsure whether reinforcements would arrive. Many local garrisons were undermanned or demoralized. The Taiping, by contrast, fought with a sense of divine mission, moving quickly and decisively. When Nanjing finally fell in 1853, the event was monumental. The city's defenses were overwhelmed. Some accounts describe fierce fighting at the gates. Others speak of panic within the walls. For ordinary residents, the arrival of the Taiping was terrifying and bewildering. A sudden and dramatic shift from imperial authority to revolutionary rule. Hong Xiuquan entered the conquered city and declared it the capital of his heavenly kingdom, renaming it Tianjing, the heavenly capital. From this central stronghold, the Taiping sought to expand their influence throughout China, envisioning a complete transformation of society in accordance with their religious and political doctrine. This moment, the fall of Nanjing and the establishment of Tianjing, marked the high point of the Taiping Rebellion. The movement controlled vast territories of southern China, commanded enormous armies, and seemed poised to march northward toward Beijing itself. Yet, beneath the surface, internal pressures and future challenges were already forming, tensions that would shape the fate of the rebellion and determine the course of the war that followed. With Nanjing captured and transformed into Tianjing, the heavenly capital, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom entered both its most powerful and its most precarious phase. From the outside, the movement appeared unstoppable. It held a vast territory across southern China, commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and was led by people who believed their authority came directly from God. Yet, within the walls of the new capital, the seeds of tension and instability were already present. Life inside the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was unlike anything most of its inhabitants had ever known. The city was reorganized according to Hong Xiuquan's religious vision. Traditional Chinese customs were swept aside. Temples dedicated to local deities were torn down. Confucian shrines were destroyed, their statues smashed, their tablets burned. Generations of ritual practice were suddenly replaced by the Taiping's strict interpretation of divine will. The new laws were meant to purify society. Opium was banned completely. Alcohol and gambling were outlawed. Prostitution, which had been widespread in many cities, was harshly punished. Taiping ideology demanded absolute moral discipline. Even men and women who were married were often encouraged or required to live in separate quarters to avoid what the movement considered moral corruption. The rules varied by time and by region, sometimes loosening, sometimes tightening, depending on the leadership's mood and the pressures of war. Daily life became regimented. People prayed regularly, sometimes several times a day. The singing of hymns and the reading of Taiping scriptures became part of public life. Clothing styles were altered to reflect Taiping values. Hairstyles changed as well. While the Qing enforced the Manchukuo hairstyle on all men, shaving the front of the head and braiding the back, the Taiping rejected this custom entirely, seeing it as a symbol of foreign oppression. For many supporters, discarding the queue was a liberating act. For others, it was a dangerous rejection of a requirement that, for generations, had been enforced under threat of death. The Taiping also imposed an ambitious land redistribution system. In theory, land was to be divided more equally among families according to size and need. The system aimed to eliminate inequality, reduce local exploitation, and create a just, harmonious society. In practice, implementation varied widely. In some areas, the reforms helped stabilize communities. In others, confusion, corruption, and wartime chaos disrupted the process. Nevertheless, the vision was radical for its time. A society free of private land ownership, where resources were shared according to divine law. But while the ideals of the Taiping movement were strict and sweeping, the leadership itself was far from unified. Hong Xiuquan, the heavenly king, ruled from a position that blended spiritual authority with royal power. Yet Hong increasingly withdrew from day-to-day administration. He spent more time in spiritual meditation, prayer, and issuing proclamations. As the city settled into its new order, Hong began delegating power to his most trusted lieutenants, men such as Yang Shuqing, the East King, Xiao Cheogui, the West King, Wei Changhui, the North King, and Shi Dekai, the Wing King. Among these figures, Yang Shuqing became particularly powerful. Yang had an intense presence and claimed that he could speak on behalf of God the Father. During ecstatic trances, he delivered commands as though heaven itself were speaking through him. At first, Hong welcomed this. Yang's trances helped unify the movement and strengthen discipline. But over time, Yang began using his supposed divine messages to expand his authority. His influence grew to the point where he could overrule even high-ranking officials. Hong became wary of him. At the same time, Yang viewed Hong's retreat from leadership with suspicion. In a movement built on divine legitimacy, even subtle challenges could turn dangerous. Beyond political struggles, practical challenges also mounted. Governing a vast territory required logistics, coordination, and administrative skill, all under conditions of constant war. The Taiping needed to secure food for the population in Tianjin, maintain supply lines, pay soldiers, and manage the expectations of civilians who had been promised an earthly paradise. These demands strained the leadership and created opportunities for rivalry and resentment. Meanwhile, the Qing dynasty, though battered and shaken, began reorganizing its defenses. A new kind of leader emerged from this crisis, the scholar general. These were men trained in Confucian philosophy rather than formal military command, but they possessed integrity, discipline, and the administrative abilities needed to rebuild regional armies. Among them, the most influential was Zheng Guofan, a thinker and administrator who had served in various government posts before being tasked with raising local militias to counter the Taiping threat. Instead of relying solely on traditional Qing forces, Zheng built what became known as the Xiang Army, named after Hunan Province. These troops were not recruited from desperate peasants but from local gentry, clans, and established families. Their loyalty was personal as well as political. They were paid reliably, trained carefully, and led by officers who lived among them. This approach created a disciplined, effective fighting force that slowly began pushing back against the Taiping armies. Zheng Guofan's strategy was methodical. He focused on retaking key river cities, securing supply lines, and surrounding Taiping-held territories. Rather than charging toward Tianjin immediately, he aimed to squeeze the rebellion geographically and economically. His approach took time, but it was effective. As the 1850s progressed, the Taiping suffered an increasing number of defeats outside their capital. At the same time, Western powers were reassessing their position. Missionaries initially saw in the Taiping movement a promising sign, a massive, Christian-inspired uprising in China. They hoped the movement might lead to widespread conversion. But as reports emerged about Taiping doctrines, practices, and leadership disputes, Western missionaries realized that Taiping theology differed significantly from their own. Diplomats and merchants, meanwhile, focused on stability, trade, and the protection of treaty port privileges. To them, the Qing government, for all its weaknesses, offered more predictable relations than the radical and unpredictable Taiping regime. The Western powers did not fully align themselves with the Qing immediately, but their preference gradually shifted. They provided limited military assistance, particularly in terms of weapons and training. This involvement intensified with the emergence of the ever-victorious army, a Chinese force led initially by an American adventurer, Frederick Townsend Ward, and later organized and expanded by the British officer Charles George Gordon. The ever-victorious army was small compared to the massive Qing and Taiping forces, but it was modern, disciplined, and effective in urban combat. It played a crucial role in defending Shanghai and recapturing important towns along the Yangtze River. As Qing forces strengthened, the internal tensions within the Taiping leadership reached a breaking point. The Tianjin incident of 1856 was the most catastrophic internal conflict the Taiping would face. Yang Shuqing, now immensely powerful, attempted to usurp more authority. Some sources suggest he demanded to be treated as equal to Hong Xiuquan. Others indicate he sought to control the government outright. His actions alarmed Hong, who feared that Yang might launch a coup. Hong acted first. He ordered the North King, Wei Changhui, and the Yan King, Qin Rigang, to return to Tianjin and deal with Yang. When they arrived, they launched a violent purge. Yang was killed, as were many of his followers. The purge spiraled rapidly. Tens of thousands were executed across the city. Blood flowed through the streets of the heavenly capital. Many innocent people were caught in the violence. The aftermath was devastating. The Taiping leadership, already strained by external pressures, was shattered internally. Trust evaporated. Capable leaders like Shida Kai, who had been one of the rebellion's most talented military commanders, fled Tianjin in disgust, taking many of his followers with him. His departure was a severe blow. Without unity at the top, the rebellion's ability to coordinate military operations declined sharply. While the Taiping tore themselves apart from within, the Qing pressed their advantage. Zheng Guofan's forces captured key cities along the Yangtze. Control of waterways allowed the Qing to restrict Taiping movement and supplies. With each passing year, the Taiping lost ground. Food shortages became common within Taiping territories. The promise of a heavenly kingdom faded as the realities of war and mismanagement took their toll. By the early 1860s, the Taiping movement was in visible decline. Their armies, once bold and expansive, were now primarily defensive. The Qing besieged Taiping strongholds, cutting them off from agricultural production. Disease spread. Morale weakened. In Tianjin itself, conditions grew increasingly desperate. Despite these hardships, Hong Xiuquan continued issuing proclamations, urging his followers to remain faithful and predicting divine intervention. But the divine did not intervene. In 1864, Qing forces tightened their encirclement around Tianjin. The final siege was brutal. Starvation gripped the city. Residents boiled leather, ate grass, and scavenged for anything edible. Soldiers fought on empty stomachs. Disease took as many lives as combat. The once grand capital of the heavenly kingdom was collapsing from within. Hong Xiuquan, weakened by illness and stress, died during the siege. Accounts vary. Some say he succumbed to disease brought on by years of strain. Others claim he starved, refusing to eat anything but manna he believed God would provide. His death left leadership to his teenage son, Hong Tianguifu, who lacked the authority or experience to rally the movement. When Qing forces finally breached the city walls in the summer of 1864, the fall of Tianjin was swift and merciless. Fighting erupted in streets and alleyways. Taiping soldiers resisted fiercely but were overwhelmed. Fires spread. Civilians fled or hid wherever they could. By the time the city fell completely, much of it was in ruins. The capture of Tianjin marked the effective end of the Taiping Rebellion. Smaller Taiping forces survived in outlying regions for months or even years, continuing to resist. But without leadership or resources, their efforts faded. The dream of the heavenly kingdom had died with the fall of its capital. The aftermath of the rebellion was staggering. Although estimates vary, historians widely agree that 20 to 30 million people died during the conflict, a number comparable to the casualties of the world wars. Entire provinces were depopulated. Farmland was ruined. Infrastructure collapsed. The social fabric of many regions was torn beyond repair. The Qing dynasty survived the rebellion, but it emerged weakened and deeply reliant on regional military leaders like Zheng Guofan. This decentralization contributed to future instability and paved the way for the dynasty's eventual collapse in the early 20th century. The Taiping Rebellion left a legacy that continues to evoke reflection. It was a movement born from suffering and fueled by visions of justice, equality, and spiritual renewal. It attracted millions who sought hope in a time of hardship. Yet it became one of the bloodiest tragedies in human history, undone by internal division, flawed leadership, and the immense power of the forces aligned against it. As we reach the end of this story, let the enormity of the events settle quietly in your mind. History is shaped by human desires, for meaning, for justice, for power, for salvation. The Taiping Rebellion is a reminder of how these desires can inspire, transform, and destroy. Thank you for listening to this long journey through one of history's most dramatic and overlooked conflicts. Whether you remained fully awake or drifted into rest, I hope this narration brought insight, reflection, and a sense of calm understanding. This has been the Midnight Lore channel. Rest well, and may your night be peaceful.